friends, welcome back. It's Amanda here from the House on October Drive with another haunted DIY for you. Today I'm going to show you how to make this spooky skeleton mirror using just a few materials, a skeleton, an old thrift store mirror, and some spray paint. I started with this mirror that I got at the thrift store actually quite a while ago. I think it was only $10. It came gold and I decided that I wanted to paint it black for this DIY. So I started by taking the backing off so I could get the mirror out. I thought it was just easier that way than to tape off the whole mirror. I set that aside because later we're going to antique the mirror itself. So once I got it all separated, I started with a quick layer of black spray paint on the inside ledge of this frame here, just so that once I put the mirror back in, the original gold color isn't going to show through at all. I added a quick layer of spray paint just on the sides there, and once that dried, I flipped it over and spray painted the entire thing black. I thought this was going to take a couple of coats of the black spray paint in order to get all the little intricate details here, but this actually went pretty quickly and I think I got pretty good coverage with just one coat. The trick here is if you have an intricate design on your mirror like this, spray it from a bunch of different angles. So you're not going to get all the little nooks and crannies with spraying it just one angle. Make sure you turn your can and then spray it from the opposite directions as well. Now there are a couple of different ways that you can antique a mirror like this. One that's pretty popular that you'll see a lot on YouTube is to actually use a paint stripper like a citrus strip on the back of the mirror to remove that paint layer and then use either a bleach or a vinegar and water solution to take off the mirror, and so you actually get some like clear glass showing through and then you add your new back to it so it looks like you stripped part of the mirror and part of the paint off. I didn't have any citrus strip on hand, so I decided to use another method, which is to use a combination of water and a darker colored spray paint to add some texture to the front of the mirror. So in the spray bottle, I have just plain water and I sprayed some droplets so that I got kind of a combination of like a mist and some larger droplets on the front of the mirror. And then I just very, very lightly use that black spray paint to put some color onto it. And then you take a paper towel and absorb that water that you just put down. So it helps, the water kind of keeps the paint from sticking in the places where the water was on the mirror. You can see there in the middle where I wiped off a little bit too much because I actually wanted to cover more of the edges than I did in the center. So I wiped off what I had sprayed onto the center and then I went back in, and you can do multiple layers of this. I went back in with the water and the spray paint again like about 3 or 4 times just so that I could get the color build up on the edges that I wanted and not so much in the center. You can also see that I tried to go in with an old dry paintbrush to kind of scrape some of that paint off and leave a different kind of texture. I decided I didn't like that texture, so I just really stuck with the dabbing of the paper towels. That was the one that I liked the best. And once you're happy with the end result of the mirror, you just basically let it dry. The spray paint will stay on the mirror, but the other cool thing about antiquing a mirror this way is that spray paint can be removed from mirrors with a little bit of acetone. So if you ever decide that you want your original mirror back, you can just put some acetone on a paper towel and rub off all that spray paint. For this project, I used one of those big 5-foot posable skeletons. I got mine at Home Depot, but they also have them at Lowe's, on Amazon. They're usually around $30 to $40 a piece. I'm only using the top half for this one, so I'm gonna have to find a way to repurpose the bottom somehow, but you wanna start by taking it apart. I had a little trouble finding a really tiny screwdriver that would fit into some of these holes, but basically once I took all the screws out, I was able to snap this thing apart. I had to pry open each of these individual vertebrae. They kind of snap together, and then underneath that I found even more screws. This thing really is pretty securely held together, but once I got all those screws out, it easily came apart. And it was a really nice clean cut too. There weren't any bone fragments I'd have to saw off or anything like that. And And then you guessed it, we are going to spray paint this guy. I went back and forth for a few minutes trying to decide if I wanted to spray paint this like a mirror finish silver or black. You can see I ended up going with the mirror finish, and that's because I wanted a lighter color that I could go in later with some darker paint and add some accents to it. I've always found that using black spray paint and adding silver accents, the silver doesn't really pop as much. So starting with the silver paint, and we're gonna add the black accents later. Again, spraying this from multiple different angles so that you get all the sides. I actually didn't find that it was as hard to spray inside the lung cavity as I thought it was going to be. I thought those were going to be some kind of hard to hit places with the bottle spray paint, but it actually wasn't too bad. The spray paint covered all these spots pretty well. So again, just using multiple angles so that you can get all the surface area covered. Make sure that you do spray both the front and the back side of the skeleton, because since it's going to be sticking out away from the mirror and that mirror is going to be reflecting the back side, you want to make sure that that back side is fully covered as well. If your skeleton is one of those with those LED light up eyes, make sure that you put a piece of tape over the LED part so that you don't accidentally spray paint over it. We definitely don't want to ruin this red eyes silver Terminator effect that we're giving the skeleton here. Okay, so once Mr. Schwarzenegger was fully dry, I brought him inside so that I could add the black accents here. I'm just going in with a dry brush and putting a sort of medium coat of black paint. I worked in small sections, brushing the paint on and then wiping off some of the excess with a paper towel. This is really up to you how much of the paint you want to leave on there or wipe off. This is your own personal look. I just wanted a little bit of accent so that it wasn't plain silver. I also wiped off a lot of the brush marks on the flatter parts, so like on the large bones, on the arms, on the back of the shoulder blades, things like that, where you could see the paint brush marks. I tended to wipe those off more than the paint that I put on all the little joints. For this, you can just use any kind of craft paint. I was using just some like dollar acrylic paint that you get at the store. You could also use fabric paint if that's what you have on hand. I wouldn't use spray paint though, because it's harder to wipe off. The spray paint dries too quickly. You want to use definitely a water-based paint for this so that you can wipe it off. However, I do find that when I'm dry brushing acrylic paint versus just regular painting it on, that dry brushing the acrylic paint does make it tend to dry faster. So definitely continue to work in small sections. This here is a close-up of me doing the black paint on one of the hands. So I'm taking a brush with just a little bit of black paint and I'm smearing it all over the place. So this isn't a full wet paintbrush that you would use if you were like painting something a solid color. You just have a little bit of your paint on there. I smear it all over the place and then I take a paper towel and just kind of dab it so that the paint really stays more in the crevices. Because I had taped over those LED light bulbs that are inside the eyes, there was a little area where the silver spray paint had not covered. So once I peeled off the tape, I just used a tiny paintbrush and a little bit of extra spray paint to cover the parts of the sphenoid bone that had been left exposed. I went in with a second coat of the black acrylic paint on like the shoulder joints and the sternum there and just accented more of the pieces on the front that I felt needed a little bit more texture. You can definitely do this in layers. It doesn't all have to be done at once. You can go back and add any more texture that you like. After that paint is dry, it's time to assemble, and then we're pretty much finished with this. So I used some black floral wire to attach the rib cage to the bottom of the mirror frame here. It's a pretty thin gauge floral wire, so it bends pretty easily, and I just looped it up through those details in the side of the mirror, through the rib cage, and then back through the mirror again. I looped it around a couple of times and then just twisted the wires together underneath, and then repeated it on the same side in the other corner of the skeleton. In order to make the skeleton lean away from the mirror without seeing too much of the attachment, I used some invisible thread for this. You could also use some fishing wire if that's what you have on hand. I used 2 lengths of this invisible thread, so wrapping it around twice. One might be strong enough, but I just really wanted to make sure that this wasn't going to break at all. When I bought this skeleton, it had a rope that attached to the top of the head so that you could hang it, so I just cut that rope out and then threaded this invisible string through that loop in the head, and then through those accents on the mirror also. You can see the string pretty easily here because it's reflecting a lot from the light that's coming in from the window behind me, but when it's actually on the wall, it's not very easy to see the string. I kind of just got a rough estimate of how far I wanted the skeleton to lean forward. I left some extra string hanging in the back so that I could adjust it once it was hanging on the wall, and I'm glad I did that because I ended up shortening it a little bit. So just make sure to give yourself a lot of extra room because it's so much easier to shorten it than it is to lengthen it. So again, once the mirror was hanging on the wall, I adjusted the length of that string so that the skeleton wasn't hanging as far forward. I just felt that he was originally hanging a little bit too far forward. When I stepped back, you couldn't really see his face much at all. So I just pulled the string tighter, tied a couple of knots in it, and then I was much happier with how he looked. Final look once I got him all hung up and situated on the wall. This is without the lights turned on. He still looks pretty cool in the daytime. This is a close-up of the string here, so you can't really see it unless you look super closely. If you come around the wall, you can see this little guy hanging off of the wall here. And with the lights turned on, it looks extra spooky, and then at nighttime, it just looks super awesome. I am so happy with how this turned out. I would love to hear what you think in the comments below, and if this is something that you would make and hang up in your own home. If you enjoyed this video, do me a huge favor and give it a thumbs up, and make sure to hit those subscribe and notification buttons so that you don't miss another haunted DIY. I'll see you in the next video.